your God power. Get everything you ever wanted and live the life of your dreams. The Master's Course. Copyright 2010 by Richard Lee McKim Jr. All rights reserved. Let the quest for knowing begin. Below is a map of where they have discovered these certain functionalities and what they do. Okay, let's have a look at this illustration. Here it says initiation of voluntary movement, tactile information, which is, touching and feeling. Here's visual cortex area, visual memory, sight. Here it says memory of sound is in the side lobe here, which I believe is the temporal lobe. Anticipation. See all these different little things they've got? What they have done is they've probed the brain and they've discovered that certain things are represented there. So when certain parts of the brain, quote unquote, aren't working, then certain parts of the body aren't working as well. So these are basically different areas of the brain that scientists have discovered that do certain things or represent certain things or certain kinds of things are stored. Now, how did they find that out? Well, they probed lots of brains, and in every single case, every single brain, they found the same kinds of things in the same kinds of areas. So that's led them to the conclusion that those processings, those processes, and those functions, and those functionalities are actually in the brain. Why? Because when that part of the brain is there, the functionality is there. When that part of the brain is missing or damaged, the functionality is gone. The functionality is not available. So they think that it's in the brain. Okay, so that's where they're at. They're believing that all that functionality is really going on in the brain. Okay. Let's continue on. You can quickly see that there are areas for sight, hearing, body movement, emotions, and everything else you can think of. My question is, how did they find these areas and discover what they actually do, and how do they know that they actually function there? Using our radio representation example, I have done some scientific, quote-unquote, research myself. Using the normal scientific approach, I experimented and discovered that this radio had several stations contained, quote-unquote, within the radio dial. When I moved the pointer to different places on the dial, there were certain places that always had sound coming from them. Therefore, I knew that they were the functioning place where those sounds are created and come from. Okay, let's have a look at this illustration. Here's a radio dial. In fact, it's the radio dial we've been using in our illustrations. And take a look at that. In this illustration, I've found four distinct places where there are radio stations. Whenever I put the dial on those four places, there's music coming out. Now, if I move the dial to a different place, there's no longer music. Now, the other thing is that in each of those places is a different kind of music. One place is jazz, and one place is rock, and one place is top 40, another place is country. There's different kinds of music, and they're in different places, and they're on that dial. Now, I wanted to be truly scientific. I wanted to really be scientific about this, just in the same way that the scientists are scientific about the brain. So what I did was, is I got several radios. In fact, I got a pile of radios. I plugged them all in, turned them all on, and sure enough, every single one of those radios had the same exact kind of music in the same place on their dial. Just like when the scientists are checking out the brains, every single brain has got the same kind of functionality, they say, in the same place. I found that every one of those radios had exactly the same kind of music in exactly the same place on their dial. So naturally, using the same scientific method that the researchers and the scientists use, I'm proclaiming that radio dial, that radio dials in general, contain music, and the music can be found at those certain places. Because every single radio I looked at, every single radio I checked out, had the same music in the same place on the dial. That's where the music was, on the dial. Now, of course, if the patient was dead, they wouldn't get any functionality in the brain, would they, when they were testing it? And sure enough, the same thing with these radios. When the radio was unplugged or turned off or had no power, the music wasn't there anymore. But when the radio was on and alive and functioning, there was music, and it was the same music on every single radio in the same exact places every single time. So, using the scientific method, I've concluded that radio dials have certain kinds of music in exactly a certain place, and it's the same every time. And it's the dial that contains the music. Now, if the radio's dead, then it's no longer functioning. That music is not available. But if the radio's alive, the music is there. Okay, let's continue. I know this because every radio that I tested had the same type music that came from the same exact place on their dial. So it is easy to conclude that the dial, quote unquote, is the place of functionality, and that each location has a certain kind of music that it produces, and that all radios experience the same thing. This makes sense, doesn't it? When something is representing something else, it has all the properties and seeming functionality of the real thing, but it's not real. These same researchers could point at the eye and say, that is where we see, but again, it is only the representation of it. They could cut open the eye and point at all kinds of nerves and lenses, and still, it's actually fake. We know that they can easily explain the vision system of the human eye, but can they explain the vision system of the human finger? How about the vision system of the human armpit? After all, we had two sisters who could each see from their armpits. How about the vision system that allows someone to get a close look at Jupiter? Explain that one. You can only explain how things work by pointing at their representations as long as they are functioning in the expected way. That is to say, that when an eye or the brain is functioning in the usual way, you can point and prod all over the representations and get great results. It all makes sense. It is supposed to. You can do the same thing with a radio dial. When it is in this position, it does this, and when it is over there, it sounds like that, etc.
To continue, go to How to Use Your God Power, Chapter number 10, Segment number 65. Let your quest for knowing continue.